Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to our channel, grecochess. And now we'll continue the conversation we had last time. Last time we spoke about character, the must if you want to be successful in chess. What is character in chess and how to differentiate it from character in everyday life. Now we'll continue with the detail, the do's and the don'ts. Let's assume that you have a very serious game to play. And for the purpose of this conversation, we'll assume that it is what's called the classical time control, which means that the two players have at least 1 hour for all their moves. What are the do's and the don'ts? And let me share my screen. And let's go by one. Before the game, the first piece of advice I have is, by the way, this is just conversation. I'm not claiming that everything I say is absolutely correct, not even that I'm practicing myself. It's just an ideal. I believe that you'll agree with me that if you can approximate this ideal, you'll be playing better chess than otherwise. And the first piece of advice I would have, the first thing to discuss is to quote from the Bible, eat, drink, be merry. Of course, the Bible was against this trio, but what does it mean here? It means that when you arrive to the game, you should not be hungry, you should not be thirsty, and you should not be tired. You should be strong and relaxed. Now, don't be stressed because only three things can happen. Either you win or you lose or you draw. And in any case, it's not the end of the world. It's going to be one of the countless wins, losses, or draws that you're going to have in your chess career. So there is no reason to be stressed and to worry. Yes, if you lose, your rating may go down a little bit, but so what? Now, if you have a cell phone, please, either leave it at home or in your car if you're driving, because you don't want people to be suspicious. Don't want these things suddenly to ring in the middle of the game or people to assume that you're checking on your phone, because today, in the tiny little iPhone, you can have more chess strength than the best human chess players. So please, if you want to avoid distractions and to avoid suspicions, leave the cell phone away. Of course, you're going to see who is your opponents, but don't worry who it is. Don't worry what is their rating. This is, I wouldn't say irrelevant. Of course, it affects the result, but it should not affect your feelings. You go there to participate in a chess game, do your best, see what you can learn, see what you can do. That's all. Now, that's it before the game. Let's see how you should behave during the game. And here there is a lot of advice. Most important is to have your full concentration on the chessboard. Don't look at the opponent. Don't care if your opponent is old, young, or even a baby, attractive, ugly, or anything else. Don't worry what's happening in the other games. Your friend may be playing at the table next to you. Don't look at their game. You can ask them later what happened. You see someone famous, a grandmaster playing, well, there is human curiosity. You would like to see how they are doing, but please forget about it. Concentrate completely on your own game, on these 64 squares. And what should you do when it is your turn? The first thing you need to do is what's called check for tactics. What does it mean? Tactics is if there is a series of moves that no matter what the opponent does, you will either be definitely better off this, and of course, in this case, be aware of it, follow the combination, these tactics, so you get the advantage. Otherwise, you will lose it. If you don't even spot it, it's a missed opportunity. On the other side, if you play the wrong move, maybe the tactics for your opponent, the combination that your opponent can benefit. Avoid, try to identify them as early as possible and avoid them. An innocent little pawn that you may move here or there without even having a second thought, and your opponent starts a brilliant combination, 5 or even more moves deep, and when it's over, forget it. When you do get tactics, please try to make sure your calculation is correct and there are no hidden in between moves. You had, for example, this pawn race, and just when you thought that your pawn would promote first, the opponent has suddenly some kind of check, stops you, and then the opponent promotes first. So be very careful. If your opponent is quote unquote generous, offers you free material, be suspicious. The material they offer you could be poisonous. We'll discuss later in the openings, but a nice example is what's called the legal mate, where the opponent offers you out of the kindness of their heart the whole queen, but 3 moves later they checkmate you. Now, if there is no tactics anywhere, meaning that there is no way that you can do a series of moves that no matter how the opponent replies, you know exactly what to do, and you're sure you'll got material. And of course, if nothing happens for your opponent, it's time to think about strategy. What is strategy? It means that you'll start your moves, but in the end, it's so deep and so complicated, you cannot be sure that you'll be better off. But based on your experience, you believe that odds are that things will turn on your favor. An example, you strengthen your pawn structure. This by itself does not guarantee anything. You cannot see all the moves until the end, but of course you know that the better pawn structure, the better the chances you're going to do well in the game. That is the difference between tactics and strategy. Tactics, you can calculate all the moves until the end. Strategy, you play with probabilities. Now, these are the things you do when it's your turn to play. What to do when it is your opponent's turn to play? Your opponent may think forever and ever and ever and ever, 5, 10, 15 minutes for just one move. And sometimes it's very easy to, quote unquote, get lazy, give your brain a break, perhaps look at the other games or think of your next meal or anything like that. But please, please don't. When it's your opponent's turn, you should also think very seriously. And what you should think about, I would say the first thing that you may want to have in your mind is guess your opponent's move. And then you'll see did you guess correctly or not. If you guessed correctly, great. If your opponent played a weaker move than what you spotted, well, it's not your fault. In fact, it's nice. But if your opponent plays a stronger move that you never suspected, well, we have work to do. But overall, one thing you can do when it's your opponent's turn to move is try to guess their move. And also think, how would you respond if your opponent plays that way? In fact, you may even want, if your opponent thinks forever, to try to guess more than 1, 2, 3, 4 moves of your opponent, the best possible moves, and for each of them, how do you react? But not only the best moves, there is a chance that your opponent may make a mistake. Try to think which are the possible mistakes, and if they happen, how are you going to take advantage for them? For example, you attack a piece, it's defended, but they may not see that the defending piece is also attacked. If they ignore it, then you take the defending piece and then you take, after you exchange it, perhaps you take after you move it, then you take the piece that you had in mind originally. It will be a pity if after the game you found that you had a wonderful combination, your opponent suddenly made a mistake out of nowhere, you never thought your opponent would do it, and you missed a chance to exploit it. What else should you do? Whether it's your turn or your opponent's, there are two thoughts that should come to your mind. One is the control of what's called the central squares, D4, D5, E4, E5, the four squares in the middle of the board. How many times do you control them and how many times does your opponent control them? This should give you an idea of how the game is going. Whoever has better control of the center has an advantage. The other thing you should have in your mind, especially as the game goes on and pieces get off the board, is try to assume what would happen if every piece disappeared and only the kings and the pawns remained. Is it winning for you, for your opponent, or is it a draw? If it's winning for you, wonderful. Try to change as many pieces as possible to reach that ending. If it's your opponent's, but if the opponent's position is better, then keep pieces in the board. And of course, don't only think how many pawns you have versus your opponent. It's nice to have more pawns, but it's even better to have pawns to promote because you may end up with very few pawns, but on the seventh rank and ready to promote. And your opponent may have tons of pawns, but in the starting position. Try to think of them in advance. What would happen if everything was exchanged and only kings and pawns remained? Now let's go one by one the three stages of the game. We'll start with the opening. Opening, too many people focus on that. They try to memorize moves, but I would say unless you're at the very top competing for tons of money, the opening is not so important. Assuming you play a decent opening, and assuming you avoid the traps, for example, the legal mate. Legal mate is when one player sacrifices a whole queen. The opponent attacks a queen, one player attacks a queen, the other guy ignores it. In fact, he's currently covering the diagonal with the knight, but then removes the knight and offers the queen for free. Very nice, you'd say, but not so nice because 2-3 moves later, two knights and the bishop will checkmate the player that sacrificed the queen. So be aware of traps like that, avoid them, and then develop your pieces, control the center, and I say perhaps castle. Not in every position you need to castle. And sometimes it's better if you castle a little later because your opponent may try to see where will you castle to start storming the pawns there. But if you postpone castling, your opponents may get nervous, may not know which pawns to push. So depending on the position, you may want to castle either king side, queen side, or not at all. But make sure your king is safe. And of course, since there is opening theory, some people have memorized moves and they play them very, very fast and automatically. But if you have more than an hour for all your moves, then the few seconds you're going to gain are nothing. But if your opponent confuses you, you may be behind. Sometimes the opponent accidentally may play two moves the wrong way and give you opportunity to checkmate before move number 10. But if you play automatically, you might miss a chance and not see it until later in the analysis. And then you will ask yourself, how did I miss it? How did I miss it? So please, I would say even from move number 1, take your time. This will put you in the mood to always think very, very seriously and carefully. Yes, you say, I'm white. I know my very first move, but put yourself in the mood that you always think before you play. Don't automatically push the C, D, or E pawn, even if you know what you're going to do. Middle game. After the opening is over, with players of the same strength, usually the game is even, but if you happen to be behind, do not panic. You blunder a piece or even two pieces, no time for panic. And if you're ahead, no time to relax. What you should look. Weaknesses. For example, a backward pawn or a piece that is undefended. Or, as I say, a knight on the rim is grim and ready for the trim. Or some piece that is not well defended, or something like that. Look for any weakness you can find. Both yours try to cover them before the opponent finds them out and exploits them. And of your opponents, now try to exploit them. You see this isolated or backward pawn, throw to it as many pieces as possible, try to gain it, and then with the extra pawn, try to create a pass pawn and promote. What would happen now? Let's assume that you analyze objectively the situation and you see that under best play, meaning both of you and your opponent played perfectly, you are lost. What you should do is try to help your opponent not play their best game. How to do it? We are all humans, and as humans, we make mistakes. So think of it. If it decision was the other way around, what is the mistake that you'd have a good chance to commit? And try to quote unquote seduce the opponent or how can we say convince the opponent to make the weaker move. And many games have changed hands much later when a player had a huge advantage in the first half and then suddenly lost it. All you need is one careless move. Now, you reach the middle game. What you should do is don't just play randomly only for the now, but think, how can I steer it towards a winning end game? That's why it's good if you know very well the end theory, so know which positions are winning for white, which for black, and which are drawn. And let's assume that there is a possibility to exchange queens and reach the end game. Before you exchange queens, you really need to think, is the ending that will arise winning for me, losing, or a draw? And act accordingly. If you happen to be ahead, be very careful in every move. Double, triple check it again and again and again, because a small little mistake and everything changes. I've had both won and lost games like that. And we're going now to the ending. The ending is very important, assuming, of course, you arrive. Many times the games are decided from the middle, but quite often they go to the ending. Ending is when very few pieces remain. It's difficult to define it, but usually ending is where your best hope to win is if you promote. And without promotion, it seems, meaning if the rule of promotion was not there, then none of the two sides could win. You should know the theory very well, all the mating patterns. So, of course, you try to steer the game towards a mating pattern that will help you. And if you end up having only kings and king and pawns, you should know the endings very well, especially if it's a king plus one pawn versus the other king. There's a whole theory about opposition and when every side, which side can win. Or even if there are more pawns, what exchanges would you need to make sure that you're the first one to promote and win the game? Now, the problem with the ending is that it comes usually after a very long opening and middle game, and both players happen to be exhausted. I mean, mentally exhausted. And it's because if you have not given you everything, you wouldn't even have reached the end game. In the end game, I need to say that you must spend in every move as much time as possible. A very tiny little mistake can change everything. Try to calculate as many moves ahead as possible. It's easy to calculate if you have a pawn race. And both sides, the only move that makes sense is to push a particular pawn. You can calculate up to 10 moves, even more. But you need to calculate as many moves as possible. Don't rush to play. Don't try to save energy. Here, you must give it all. But what to do? Let's assume that you already have a headache because there are so many twists and turns in the middle game. You made it alive to the end game, but how to end it? I would suggest if you have enough time, that's why try to avoid time trouble. If you have enough time, take a little break. And usually tournaments, they offer free water. You may want to drink a cup of water, not because you're thirsty, but just to clear your mind. And this is what you're supposed to do, or at least try to do during the game. And the game is over. After, what do you need to do? Of course, you need to make sure that the result is posted correctly. You keep your score sheet, But something else that is important is, let's assume you lost, and you're going to lose about half of your games. It's not time for mourning, not time to start crying and screaming, and especially not time for excuses. If only, if only, if only. Losses happen. Not only losses, but painful losses where you are sure you're going to win, you had everything ready, and at the very last moment, the crucial move that you're hoping was not there. You definitely knew you had this backrank mate, but your opponent brought a bishop out of the other end of the universe and covered the check, so you end up with the material you sacrificed to reach this position. These are very painful, but nothing to worry. Just smile. I lost. So what? If possible, analyze the game with fellow players, and sometimes even your opponent may want to analyze with you. Yes, if you lost, your opponent may be so happy they definitely want to talk about it whole time. Now, please be careful when you discuss with the fellow players, not in the room of the tournament. Go to the next room, the Skittles, that is specially made for these discussions. And also today you can analyze with computers. Chess.com has a nice computer. You've seen some of my games and analyze them. It's going to tell you every move. What is the best move for white? What is the best move for black? And what is the advantage or disadvantage of each side? And then it's going to tell you how many moves were brilliant, excellent, good moves, uh, mistakes, errors, inaccuracies, what is the percentage of accuracy of every player, and guess the ELO. Based on only this game, what would their ELO be? You made mistakes, even painful ones, learn from them. If you blunder, meaning if you, for example, you left a piece on priest, or you had every advantage and then you missed the checkmate of the opponent, it's time to learn from that and don't do it again. Ladies and gentlemen, these are my thoughts about how to play well in the game of chess, the details. As I mentioned before, I'm not claiming that this is an absolute guide with no exceptions, but I believe that this is what is called the ideal. If you can approximate that, you'll definitely be better off. And I'm not claiming that myself, I'm doing everything I'm preaching. But my goal here is not to tell you what so much what I'm doing, but what needs to be done. Let's try to be aware of them. Let's try to put them into practice. Not so easy. And by the way, before I end, I'd like to thank the subscribers. We already had some people that have subscribed to my channel. Thank you very much. Thanks for everybody that's viewing, and we'll continue later with some other topic. Ladies and gentlemen, goodbye.